I stepped out of the black SUV, my sneakers hitting the marble pavement with a quiet thud. The night air was crisp, and the soft glow of golden lights spilled from the grand entrance of the restaurant. A place like this? Yeah, it wasn't exactly my usual spot, but tonight was different. As I approached the doors, I could already feel the weight of the stairs. People in tailored suits and silk dresses, sipping wine, laughing in hushed, sophisticated tones. This wasn't my scene, and they knew it the second I walked in. The maître d', a slim man in a pressed uniform, stood at the podium eyeing me from head to toe. His practiced smile faltered for a brief second before he caught himself. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" I pulled down my shades slightly, giving him a look. "Nah, but I figured a place this fancy gotta have a table somewhere, right?" He hesitated. A flicker of something, doubt, amusement, disbelief, crossed his face before he glanced at the waiting list on his podium. The pen in his hand twirled between his fingers. "Unfortunately, sir, we are fully booked tonight," he said smoothly, but his eyes told a different story. Behind me, a couple strolled in, the man in a navy blue tuxedo and the woman in an emerald green gown. "Ah, Mr. Fontaine, welcome back," the maître d' greeted, his tone completely different now, warm, accommodating. They walked right past me, escorted inside without a second glance. I chuckled under my breath. "Fully booked, huh?" The maître d' gave a tight-lipped smile. "I'm afraid so." "All right, I saw how it was going to be." I turned my head slightly, scanning the room. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their reflections dancing on the polished floors. Each table was adorned with white linens and flickering candles. The scent of grilled steak and fresh truffle lingered in the air. I caught a few diners stealing glances at me, their curiosity barely masked. Then I spotted him. At the far end of the restaurant, a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit stood near the bar. His fingers wrapped around a glass of whiskey, sharp eyes, salt and pepper hair. The kind of confidence that came from owning a place like this. The owner. And the moment his gaze landed on me, I knew he recognized me. The owner's eyes locked onto mine. For a split second, I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe even surprise. Then just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a carefully measured look. He placed his glass down on the bar and took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The maître d' noticed him approaching and straightened up immediately. "Sir, I was just informing this gentleman that we are fully—" The owner raised a hand, cutting him off. His gaze never left mine. "Is there a problem here?" I smirked. "Guess that depends. Your guy here says the place is fully booked. But I just watched a couple walk in without a hitch." The owner glanced at the maître d', who suddenly looked like he wished he could melt into the floor. Then, with an air of nonchalance, the owner turned back to me. "What's your name?" I pulled down my shades completely now, tucking them into my pocket. "Shaq." He nodded slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Right, and you just walked in here expecting a table?" I shrugged. "Ain't that how restaurants work? You walk in, you eat." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes stayed unreadable. "Normally, yes, but this isn't just any restaurant. People book weeks in advance. They come here for a particular experience." I raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is that experience?" Before he could answer, a voice piped up from a nearby table. "Wait a minute. Are you Big Shaq?" Heads turned. A murmur ran through the dining room. The energy in the place shifted. Some people squinted at me, trying to place my face. Others whispered to their companions. A young guy, maybe in his 20s, got up from his chair, his phone already in his hand. Yo, it is Big Shaq, man. I used to bump Man's Not Hot all the time. That song was legendary. The reaction rippled outward. A couple of diners chuckled. Someone at the bar lifted their glass in acknowledgement. The owner exhaled slowly, glancing around at the sudden buzz my presence had created. The maître d' looked even more uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I crossed my arms. Looks like your guests don't mind me being here. The owner studied me for a long moment, then let out a quiet chuckle. He turned to the maître d'. Give Mr. Shaq a table. The maître d's jaw clenched slightly, but he nodded. Right this way, sir. I followed him, feeling the weight of the owner's gaze still on me. As I passed a few tables, I caught snippets of conversation. Some people were excited, amused even. Others, not so much. A well-dressed man in a velvet blazer muttered something to his wife, shaking his head. I smirked. This was going to be interesting. I settled into my seat, a prime spot near the center of the restaurant. The maître d' placed the menu in front of me with a stiff nod, then disappeared like he couldn't wait to be anywhere else. I leaned back, scanning the room. People were still sneaking glances, some pretending not to stare, others openly whispering. A waiter arrived, dressed in a crisp white shirt and a black vest, his expression carefully neutral. Can I get you something to drink, sir? I tapped my chin, pretending to think. What's the best thing you got? He hesitated. We have an extensive selection of fine wines, imported directly from... Nah, I cut in, shaking my head. I mean, what do you think is the best? For a moment, he seemed caught off guard. His eyes flicked toward the owner, who was still standing near the bar, watching everything like a hawk. Then, regaining his composure, he cleared his throat. Our house, special cocktail is quite popular. I nodded. All right, bring me one of those. As he walked away, I noticed a waiter at a nearby table serving a couple. Their drinks were placed with a flourish, and the waiter engaged them in polite conversation, smiling warmly. The contrast wasn't lost on me. The energy was different here. Some people clearly thought I didn't belong. A group at the far end of the restaurant kept sneaking looks. One of the guys whispering something that made his friends smirk. A lady in a pearl necklace wrinkled her nose slightly as she glanced my way. I wasn't new to this. Different setting, same script. The waiter returned, placing the cocktail in front of me with as little interaction as possible. Would you like to order now? I picked up the menu, scanning it. Half the dishes had names so fancy, they might as well have been in another language. What's good here? He hesitated again. Our Wagyu steak is a customer favorite. I grinned. All right, let's do that. Another glance toward the bar. The owner was still watching. I raised my glass slightly in his direction before taking a sip. The drink was good, real good. But I wasn't sure if it tasted better, because I was actually enjoying it, or because I knew my presence was shaking things up. As I waited for my food, I noticed how the other guests were treated. Some got personal recommendations, wine pairings, little stories about where their ingredients came from. Me? Just a menu and a drink. I wasn't mad. I'd seen it before. But what they didn't know, I was just getting started. The steak arrived, perfectly plated, glistening under the dim restaurant lights. The waiter set it down with a stiff nod, then disappeared before I could even say thanks. No, enjoy your meal. No, let me know if you need anything. Just a quick drop off, like I was an afterthought. I chuckled under my breath. Same place, different rules. Cutting into the steak, I had to admit. It was good, really good. But as I chewed, I could still feel the tension hanging over the room like a heavy curtain. The hushed whispers, the judgmental glances, the silent expectation that I'd somehow do something to prove their assumptions right. Then, the unexpected happened. A voice from across the room rang out. "Excuse me, sir." I looked up. An older gentleman, maybe in his 60s, dressed in an expensive navy suit, stood up from his table. His face was familiar, one of the ones who had been watching me since I walked in. His wife, dressed in a pearl-white gown, reached for his arm as if trying to stop him. He gently brushed her hand away and walked toward me. The restaurant went silent. Even the waitstaff paused. He stopped right beside my table, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then, to everyone's shock, he extended his hand. "I just wanted to say," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I misjudged you." I blinked, setting down my fork. "Oh, yeah?" He nodded. "I saw you walk in and I assumed. Well, I assumed wrong. But then I watched how you carried yourself. You weren't loud. You weren't arrogant. You were patient. You noticed things. And I realized." He hesitated for a second before continuing. "You handled yourself with more grace than most people in this room." The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. I looked at the man, then at his outstretched hand. Slowly, I reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, respectful, not forced. "I appreciate that," I said simply. He gave a small nod and turned back to his table. But the moment he sat down, something shifted. One by one, people started to soften. The same waiter who had barely acknowledged me earlier now came by and asked if I needed anything else. Another guest, one of the younger guys from before, walked past and gave me a quick nod of respect. Even the maitre d', who had tried to turn me away at the door, suddenly seemed nervous, adjusting his collar as he passed by. And then, the biggest reaction of all. The owner, who had been watching everything unfold, finally stepped forward. He crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, stopping right at my table. The entire restaurant held its breath. "Mr. Shaq," he said, his voice even, "I'd like to personally apologize." I leaned back, studying him. "For what?" "For how you were treated when you walked in." He hesitated, then sighed. "It shouldn't have happened." I let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Nah, it shouldn't have." Another pause. Then, to everyone's shock, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. He set it on the table. "This is my personal invitation," he said. "Next time you won't need a reservation. Just walk in." The silence in the room was deafening. I picked up the card, flipping it between my fingers. Then, with a smirk, I slid it into my pocket. "Appreciate that." The owner gave a respectful nod before walking away. As I finished my meal, the energy in the room was completely different. Some people still didn't know what to make of it. Others had learned something. But one thing was clear. Perceptions had changed. And me? I just came for a meal. But sometimes, a meal turns into a message.